Mr Speaker, in the early hours of Wednesday the 8th of July 2020, 10-year-old Bridget Biddy Porter was brutally killed when she was left alone in the house with a teenager she trusted. To fulfil her desire to murder, Biddy's killer methodically planned and executed one of the most heinous killings by a young person in Australian history. The injuries inflicted on Biddy were so shocking they've been suppressed by the Supreme Court. But Biddy's teen killer showed no remorse. She calmly confessed to police that she knew killing Biddy was wrong, but did it anyway. People knew Biddy's killer was dangerous. Her school knew, her friends knew, and her parents knew of her lust to kill and her obsession with weapons she referred to by name. None of them did anything to prevent her desire to kill. But what are those Biddy left behind? The living victims of this horrific crime, her parents, Rebecca and Dominic, her brothers and extended family, and I acknowledge them today in the gallery. Like so many other victims of heinous crimes, Biddy's parents continue to suffer from severe anxiety and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. There is no escape from their overwhelming grief or the darkness that continues to engulf their world each and every day, because the system that should support them has failed them repeatedly. Systems focused on protecting their daughter's killer rather than meeting community expectations and achieving justice for all victims and their loved ones. The Justice for Biddy Porter ePetition, signed by 21,550 people, New South Wales residents, and another 18,450 from Australia and the world via a .org petition, have joined our calls for justice for precious Biddy, her parents and every victim of serious crime, because sadly, Biddy's case is not an isolated one. 40,000 voices overall are demanding reforms to the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice Victims Support Services that fails to recognise the immediate and long-term financial, physical and mental health needs of victims. It fails to provide adequate financial support or essential services, including social work and free access to appropriate mental and physical health care for victims of serious crime. 40,000 voices are demanding an inquiry into the New South Wales Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions for failing in its responsibilities under the Charter of Victims' Rights, the Victims' Rights and Support Act 2013, and the Office's DPP prosecution guidelines. The DPP misled Biddy's parents with assurances that her killer would serve a limiting term. The DPP withheld documents that Biddy's parents had a lawful right to see. The DPP allowed her parents to believe Biddy's identity was suppressed for 20 years. The petitioners are demanding an inquiry into the Mental Health Review Tribunal's failure to meet its legislative responsibilities. Biddy's self-confessed killer, subject to oversight by the tribunal, is being detained at a forensic health facility receiving appropriate care by a team of mental health professionals, taxpayer-funded legal advice, NDIS and Centrelink funding. It's shocking that families of murder victims don't have equal free access to essential specialised mental health services, legal advice or ongoing financial support. It's shocking that the tribunal respects killers' rights over victims and their families' views. It's shocking that less than 3 years after Biddy's brutal murder, the tribunal permitted her killer escorted day release to enjoy trips to public places where other vulnerable children play. It's shocking, but the tribunal could release Biddy's killer at any time. With its secret autonomous powers to release killers back into the community, the tribunal operates without transparency or accountability and fails to adhere to community standards and future dangerousness tests. While the tribunal and the DPP have the power to avoid public scrutiny and accountability, victims like Biddy and her parents will continue to be silenced, with justice denied to them and all victims of serious crime. We're calling for justice for Biddy and a vital change to the governance, systems and services currently failing all victims, currently inflicting additional pain and suffering on this minority group. A group that have endured the unthinkable and deserve our respect, compassion and support. In presenting the Justice for Biddy ePetition, I call on this House to stand with us in our calls for parliamentary inquiries into the Office of Director of Public Prosecutions, the Mental Health Review Tribunal, the Department of Communities and Justice, and calling for a coronial inquest to identify the underlying factors contributed to Biddy's death to help prevent future killings. I commend this petition to the House.
I call the member for Maitland. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I acknowledge the family and community of Bridget Biddy Porter in the gallery today, and I want to say on the behalf of the New South Wales Government that we express our deepest sympathies for your loss and the ongoing trauma that you all experience as a result of this heinous crime. I am speaking on behalf of the Attorney-General today, who could not be here, and has asked me to similarly pass on his apologies as well. This petition was tabled on the 4th anniversary of the death of 10-year-old Bridget Biddy Porter, who was killed by a young person known to her, as we've heard from the member for Orange. And I do want to pay tribute to the member for Orange for his passion and advocacy, not just for Biddy, but for many victims of these terrible crimes. It is a difficult situation to be in for any elected member of parliament, to see that grief go through your community, and there is a strong desire, and he has been a strong advocate. And I also acknowledge the work that you have done, and I acknowledge particularly Rebecca in the gallery in terms of getting us across all of this. And I know up in my office I have a picture of your daughter, which moves me every day in the thoughts of what we should be doing to stop those kind of events from happening again, and better supporting the victims who are left behind. The trauma experienced by everyone in this situation is overwhelming, and in the depths of your grief and your suffering and your loss, to stand up and say you want change is not only a very brave thing to do, but I understand it's also the only way to get through each day, to feel that you can in some way stop some other person from experiencing that kind of grief. There's not a person in this chamber who doesn't grieve for you and your families. The petition calls on the government to initiate parliamentary inquiries into the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Mental Health Review Tribunal, and increase support for victims of serious crimes, and conduct a coronial inquest into Biddy's death. And there is no doubt that it is a tragedy. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is an independent prosecuting authority, and the Attorney-General has said to me that under the law he's unable to comment on the conduct of these proceedings or direct the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions due to the way that our legal system is set up. But he does assure me that the ODPP has had regular and ongoing contact with your family about this matter. He's also advised me that the Victims Support Scheme provides counselling, financial support and recognition payments to victims of violence in New South Wales, and we all want that to be in a scheme that is fit for purpose, and the Department of Communities and Justice is currently reviewing the Victims' Rights and Support Act 2013, and the New South Wales Government will carefully consider any recommendations arising from this review. In terms of the Mental Health Review Tribunal, again, an independent specialist quasi-judicial body established to undertake functions, including making orders about forensic patients. And there are mechanisms for transparency and accountability, including open hearings and appeals. And I know that the Attorney-General and the Minister for Mental Health and Youth will also be very keen to be continuing to work with you and with the member for Orange in any way that they can to try and assist you in working through what has happened to you in your situation and to making that process better for other people. Again, the request for a coronial inquest is a matter for the State Coroner. And this is the problem. And in a former life, I was a Shadow Minister for Prevention of DV and Sexual Assault, and I know that these processes are very difficult for people in your situation. And it is a maze, and it is something that we all want to work better, as on both sides of this chamber, not a political thing, to try and make better. I know that the State Coroner is currently reviewing the decision to dispense with the holding of an inquest at the request of Mr and Mrs Porter, and I hope that this brings a positive outcome to that request. There's no legal change, nothing that can bring back Biddy. I acknowledge your grief and your loss, and we will do all we can to make this process better for you and for others into the future.
Thank you, Minister. I call the member for Tamworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The 8th of July 2020 is a day that people in my community will never, ever forget. The day that Biddy Porter was murdered on a farm outside of Gunnedah in the Tamworth electorate. I acknowledge members of Biddy's family and friends in the gallery here today who have been living with that shock, the trauma and the grief for more than 4 years. Your journey here has been incredibly difficult, and your fight for justice will continue beyond this debate. I commend the member for Orange for taking carriage of this petition and his work advocating on behalf of Biddy's family. I went to see the member for Orange recently to discuss the petition and to gain his expert perspective as a former police prosecutor. I also spoke with Dom a few weeks ago and learnt of his grief, his mental anguish, his inability to return to work because of the trauma of losing his daughter, his diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. The member for Orange is leading the substantive fight on a number of issues, including the push for a coronial inquest. His expertise in this matter is extensive, and I commend him for his work on this case and working with you. I acknowledge that the support to the family following this unimaginable tragedy has been totally inadequate, and I support the call for a parliamentary inquiry. Victim services are legislated under the Victims' Rights and Support Act 2013, which is intended to provide support for victims. Under the Act, parents of victims under the age of 18 should be eligible for financial support and for counselling. That support and counselling offered to Biddy's family was clearly totally inadequate, missing in action. Dom, Rebecca and family feel as though the system have let them down. They feel as though there was not adequate compensation to assist them through an incredibly tough time in which they were unable to work and still can't. They feel as though there was not adequate access to counselling or mental health support in the following months and years. The $7,500 recognition payment they received could never have covered the cost of this trauma. It's staggering to believe that it would have. The up to 22 hours of counselling could never be enough. It should be ongoing. They are correct in saying that the mental health support is harder to come by in regional New South Wales, and I know in my area we've fought incredibly hard to improve mental health support services. They are correct in saying more needs to be done. This case is a strong case for victim support reform. The Victims' Rights and Support Act 2013 is well-intentioned, but in this instance, as stated, totally inadequate, and more needs to be done to support Dom, Rebecca, family and friends. Claire Collins, Chair of the Advocacy Australia, says it's very clear there appears to be inequity between a victim's rights compared to those of a killer. Victims are not receiving free independent legal advice to help evaluate the DPP's recommendations or any legal representation at the Mental Health Review Tribunal hearing with leave from the Mental Health Review Tribunal. I strongly urge the government to support change that will mean greater support for victims' families, particularly in extreme, devastating circumstances such as this. Again, I support an inquiry into how the administration of the Mental Health Review Tribunal handled this case and transparency in their administration and consultation with living victims.
Call the member for the entrance.
Speaker, well, first, let's remember Biddy. her life was an important and enduring memory we need to hold on to. And that's an important outcome of the work the family's been doing, the community's been doing in seeking justice for Biddy. But it's also an enduring legacy that we should not forget Biddy and her short time amongst us, and how we should not forget that, and we need to hold on to it as we seek justice for Biddy. That legacy and seeking justice is a difficult path, and I want to commend Biddy's parents and supporters for the courage to speak out and continue to pursue justice for Biddy. The search for justice invites us to work alongside those who suffer and listen to their stories, and that's part of what today's debate is. As we go through this process, we can learn and we can achieve change and progress as a society. Deficiencies in the Mental Health Review Tribunal have been identified by government. A 2017 review by Anthony Wheely, KC, made 30 recommendations. All were accepted by government and have been implemented. The Men's Labor government has allocated additional money this year to the Mental Health Review Tribunal to improve records, upgrade IT systems and invest in a new case management system. These system improvements will position the Mental Health Review Tribunal to be a more robust and responsive system which can meet the potential continued growth in patients' numbers and associated hearings. I'm aware of concerns raised by Phil Donato. I'm aware of concerns raised by some of my constituents. I have two families in my electorate who have experience of the Mental Health Review Tribunal. They've talked to me about their concerns, and their points are well made. And we need to do more to make sure that the Mental Health Review Tribunal not only seeks to rehabilitate people who have done wrong in our society, but also pays due regard to the victims and their journey and their need to see justice done as well. I was speaking to one of my constituents this morning, and he said a lot of his experience of the Mental Health Review Tribunal turns around how the chairman of the Mental Health Review Tribunal handles each of the hearings. And this gentleman, he's been attending Mental Health Review Tribunal hearings for the last 15 years after a killer took his uncle away from his family. That's a long period to be seeking justice and to follow up on a matter. And he said the skill and the empathy and the handling of a tribunal hearing by the chairman is really crucial as to how victims perceive justice to be done, as well as rehabilitation. So I will be talking to the Attorney General about the experience of my constituents, and hopefully we can build that into the system to make sure we provide a better experience, a better rehabilitation service, but also do justice to those who have lost in the way that you people have lost and our society has lost by having Biddy Porter taken away from us in such a terrible way. A loss for all of us as a society, and I give you my deepest regards on behalf of people in this house and in my community.
I call the member for Wahroonga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on the petition on behalf of the New South Wales opposition in my capacity as the Shadow Attorney General. And can I begin by acknowledging Biddy's parents and family and friends who are here today, and our hearts go out to you, and we can never understand the pain that you are feeling. Biddy's death at just 10 years of age is an absolute tragedy. Whilst we don't want to dwell on the matter, it was a horrible crime. MPs regularly receive petitions, and particularly as Shadow Attorney General, I am often written to about crimes and legal matters. However, the campaign to highlight the issues surrounding Biddy's death has been exceptionally detailed and effective, and I congratulate all that have been involved in that campaign. In dealing with each of the elements of the petition, I would like to voice my concerns about the aspects of this case and the issues that have been raised. I do so not only as the Shadow Attorney General, but also as a senior counsel admitted as a barrister in 1996. The first issue I want to raise is the extent of the suppression orders that have hampered Biddy's family from raising the issues of public policy that are contained in this petition. The first thing I did after I received material was to ask my office for a copy of the sentencing judgment in the New South Wales Supreme Court, to read a summary of the evidence at the trial, the legal analysis of the facts and law and reasons for sentence in the New South Wales Supreme Court. The judgment is not publicly available. How can, as democratic lawmakers in this Parliament, we properly respond to the public issues raised in the petition that justice has failed in this case if we are not able to read the sentencing judgment to understand what should be the most reliable explanation of the case? Judgments in exceptional cases like this should only suppress the parts that are absolutely necessary. There should be free legal support for victims and their families who wish to challenge all or part of suppression orders that are made, and a mechanism for MPs to have access to judgments in the public interest, if necessary on a confidential basis, so that we can perform our role on behalf of the community. I commend the member for Orange for his diligence in this matter. There should also be mechanisms for speedy and transparent accountability for concerns raised in the petition concerning the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, concerns that they may not have followed their responsibilities under the Charter of Victims' Rights. Biddy's case is not the only high-profile case where concerns have been raised by victims of crime. Similar concerns were raised about the performance of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions by the victims and families of the Hunter bus crash in recent months. Often the DPP effectively in court represents both the public but also the families of victims. It's a difficult role, inherent on occasions with conflicts of interest. Perhaps a different and better way of dealing with these conflicts can arise between those two responsibilities can be arrived at. And I note that Biddy's family believe that the support by the Victim Support Services of the Department of Communities and Justice requires reform and improvement. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions are public servants, and they should be accountable to the public for the way in which they perform their publicly funded duties. Public resources being given to victims and their family is surely justifiable on the basis that they did not choose to be in the situation that they find themselves in. And it's an unbearably painful trauma that Biddy's family have had to endure. The Mental Health Review Tribunal's work is obviously difficult, but any concerns about its transparency, accountability and mechanisms for victims' families to be supported and provided with an explanation and accountability warrants further investigation. Under the Coroner's Act, there are various avenues for an inquest to occur. Under Section 28, the Attorney General can order an inquest. And although the Minister didn't seem to indicate that that would occur, I would encourage her to lobby the Attorney General to order an inquest in this matter as one of the easy things that the Minns Labor government can do to satisfy this petition before the Parliament. Can I congratulate the large number of people who have acknowledged the importance of Biddy's life by signing the petition. It is a tragic case which has rightly drawn deep emotions. If the inquiries that are requested can stop another case like Biddy's, then they will be justified. Again, can I end by expressing my deep condolences to the families, friends, and parents of Biddy, and I support the petition before this House.
Member for Barwon, I just draw the House's attention that the available speaking time is now limited to 3 minutes, but Member for Barwon would like to...
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to make a contribution.
For 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yes please, Mr Speaker.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. Member for Barwon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and at the outset I'd like to acknowledge the friends and family of Bridget or Biddy Porter in the gallery. I can't imagine what you've been through, honestly. Mr Speaker, when a crime is committed, the public expects certain things to happen. They expect the criminal will be apprehended, prosecuted, tried, convicted, and a suitable sentence passed on to detain or restrain the criminal with the objective of preventing them from reoffending or to discourage them or others from offending. But we also expect the victims of a crime will be looked after, or in the case of murder, the families of the victim will be supported and cared for. Murder victims' families live with the knowledge that their loved one's life has been taken away by a murderer, usually under horrific circumstances, and to cope with the trauma that knowledge causes. So it seems fair and just that there would be something to compensate them for that loss or to support them in their ongoing grief and their struggle to come to terms with that loss. But sometimes the system just doesn't work that way. Sometimes the focus is more on ensuring the rights of the criminal rather than doing something for the ongoing suffering of the relatives of the victim. When 10-year-old Biddy Porter from Orange was killed in 2020 by a teenager she and her family knew, there was an expectation that the murderer would be detained, that Biddy's family would be supported, and that the parents would be allowed to honour Biddy's memory. The murderer was apprehended and subjected to legal process. However, they were deemed mentally incompetent, and instead of prison time, the murderer was referred for treatment in a mental health care facility. Biddy's parents were led to believe that this would mean that the murderer would spend more time locked away than if she were sent to an ordinary prison. But they have since learnt that Biddy's killer has been granted escorted day release. The murderer has been afforded counselling, NDIS access, and other support that seemed to have been denied the grieving family. Instead, Biddy's parents, Rebecca and Dominic, were restricted from using their daughter's name or image because the killer is a relative and it might lead to someone discovering the murderer's identity. There is more concern about protecting the identity of the murderer than there is about allowing the parents to honour and cherish the memory of their daughter. Mr Speaker, I am not against rights for convicted criminals. There was a time when criminals could have their rights completely taken away and they'd be forced to forfeit property, lands, goods. Convicts could be banished to another country or flogged on the whim of overseers or even executed. The public mostly came to consider such deprivation of rights as too extreme. In Australia, as in many other countries, in the 20th century, the death penalty was abolished and prisoners were given more rights. This was to prevent cruel and unusual punishment, to prevent prisoners from being exploited and to offer reform as a potential course, another potential course. But the pendulum, Mr Speaker, has continued to swing too far. A major change came with the insanity plea, that a murderer could be deemed not responsible for their actions if it could be established that some mental illness impaired their ability to understand what they were doing was wrong. The first instance of the plea being used successfully was in 1843, when Daniel M'Naghten tried to assassinate the then British Prime Minister, but blamed his psychosis and was acquitted of the murder. Established in legal precedent over the decades since, it has been shaped in legislation. But it led to some perverse outcomes. In 2014, in Cobar, Ian and Margaret Setri were murdered by their son Scott. Because he was deemed not guilty by reason of mental illness, he still stood to inherit from the parents he had murdered. Wendy Robinson successfully fought it in the Supreme Court, but lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process. The loophole was closed in New South Wales in the Mental Health Act and Cognitive Impairment Forensic Provisions Act 2020, which allowed a verdict of act proven but not criminally responsible. The law also requires a referral to the Mental Health Review Tribunal. Unfortunately, we are seeing decisions being made by the tribunal that only considers the right of the perpetrator and often fails to consider the impact of their decisions on the victim's family. The mental state of the murderer is given constant consideration, but what about the mental state of the victim's families? When the tribunal made its decision to allow Biddy's murderer day release, they did not consult Biddy's parents. Yesterday, I met with members of the Homicide Victim Support Group who had similar stories of murderers receiving better treatment than victims' families, of being ignored, not consulted, or being unable to appeal the decisions of the tribunal. The petitioners are reasonably calling for parliamentary inquiries into the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Mental Health Review Tribunal, reform to the Department of Communities and Justice Victim Support Services, and a coronial inquest to identify the underlying factors that contributed to Biddy's death and to help prevent future killings of this type. When someone is murdered, we expect justice to be served, but there is a strong sense here that an injustice is being done. And Mr Speaker, I think this House should do everything in its power to try and bring about inquiries into those areas. Thank you.
I thank the member for Barwon, and I now call the member for Orange in reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd firstly like to begin by thanking all the speakers who spoke on the petition. The Minister for Regional Transport, the member for Maitland, representing the Attorney General, the member for Tamworth, the member for Entrance, the member for Warunga, and also the member for Barwon. The member for, and no doubt this petition has broad support across the Parliament. You can see that by the number of members sitting in this debate right now, many wearing the orange lapels that were provided to the parliamentarians today, and I appreciate the support from all my parliamentary colleagues. This is a matter where I could not think of a more tragic set of circumstances. It's unimaginable what Bridget had to endure, and that Beck and Maritz and Dom and all the family and friends and the community, the Central West Orange community as well, has been rocked to the core. This is a matter that's seeking inquiries into another number of government departments, but it is one of the most serious matters deserving of that. We've heard a number of speakers talk about issues affecting either their electorates or similar sorts of incidents happening across the state. This needs to be the catalyst for change. I'd like to thank Advocacy Australia, Claire Collins. I'd also like to thank Martha Jamal from the Homicide Victim Support Group, Michael Usher and Tim Sheridan from Spotlight, who really did shine a spotlight on this story. Thank you, because no doubt without the support of all you people, we wouldn't have got the signatures required to trigger this debate today on the floor of Parliament. This is only the beginning. This isn't the end. There's a lot of work to do, but I can assure you, you have the Parliament's support here today to do all we can to improve what's happened, to make it much more fluid and better for victims and families of victims of homicide especially. I'll finish with this, and I didn't get a chance to say this, and I know, Mr Speaker, I've lapsed, but I think it's important. We had a very brief, this afternoon, a function in the Jubilee Room that was attended by many of you, and many of you in the gallery that were there, and Michael Usher emceed it, and it was a fitting tribute to Bridget. And I thank all my parliamentary colleagues for coming along to that. But I end with this, and I'd like to also thank the Premier, Chris Minns, who Beck and Maritz were able to meet with also this afternoon. I thank the Premier for that. But I ask that you hear Biddy's voice roar, like we did this afternoon in the Jubilee Room, her favourite song, when calling for vital change to systems currently failing all victims of serious crime. And I commend this petition to the House.
I thank the member for Orange. The question is that the House take note of the petition. All of that opinion say aye. Aye. To contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The debate on the 20,000 signature electronic petition on justice for Biddy Porter having concluded, I thank the guests in the gallery who visited to listen. And if I can just reiterate in my own words, this might seem like only a small gesture to pass this petition motion here today, but I can assure you it's a very important step in this House for what will proceed. So thank you to everybody that's been involved. Thank you. Thank you.